ladies, to Girl Talk Apologetics. We have the Q&A with Dr. Stephen Meyer, author of The Return of the God Hypothesis that we have just finished reading. I'm going to give you a little intro about Dr. Meyer. Stephen Meyer received his PhD in the philosophy of science from the University of Cambridge. A former geophysicist and college professor, he's now directing the Discovery Institute Center for Science and Culture in Seattle. In addition to The Return of the God Hypothesis, which we read, he's written Darwin's Doubt, The Explosive Origin of Animal Life in a Case for Intelligent Design, and Signature in the Cell, DNA and the Evidence for Intelligent Design. He's also published editorials in national newspapers ranging from the Wall Street Journal to the LA Times. He's also appeared on national radio and television, including NBC, ABC, CBS, all the alphabet letters, including 20 years ago, this year actually, I produced a segment of his on Lee Strobel's short-lived Faith Under Fire debate show on PAX. And he debated Michael Shermer. Darwin versus Design, I believe, was the title of that. So welcome, Dr. Meyer, to the show.
It's nice to be with you all. And yeah, I'd forgotten about that a debate with Lee Strobel. I think I was in Italy when we filmed that or something, but it seemed to come out well. Lee was, I think, on my side. So
yeah, naturally.
That rarely happens. It's usually 2 or 3 against 1. But anyway.
All right. Well, Patty and I are going to switch off asking you questions that the women have submitted beforehand.
All right. The first few questions are on a personal note. The first one was actually my question, and I was wondering, when did you first recognize your interest in studying science, and where were you in your faith journey at that time?
Well, the science part started very early before any faith. I was maybe 4 and was very interested in dinosaurs. And my grandmother sent me a book that was apparently a college textbook about dinosaurs. And so my mom just passed away. So we've had a lot of family stories being traded in the last couple weeks. And apparently, when I was going to kindergarten, I explained to the teacher that I wanted to be a paleontologist. And she laughed and said, "Oh, that's so fun when kids latch onto something and they don't even know what it means." And my mom got indignant and said, "Oh no, he knows exactly what that means." Anyway, I remember burying chicken bones in the backyard to pretend to be a paleontologist. And now I have a grandson who's 4 who has the same interest. So I don't know, it's genetic. But I did, in college, I did a double major in physics and geology, but I was always sneaking across campus to take philosophy class. So I got a minor in philosophy, but it mainly from a professor who was a staunch defender of the work of Francis Schaeffer, and who really liked Schaeffer and Os Guinness and the guys who were publishing things out of L'Abri. So that was my exposure to philosophy came through the lens of the L'Abri authors, and that was very formative for me.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry about the loss of your mother. I'm sure we all have that same sentiment, but I'm very impressed that your grandmother would give you a college textbook at the age of 4 years old. She must have had a sense about you, I think.
Well, the pictures were awfully good in the middle, I remember, but I don't remember reading it, much of it, but yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right, this question is from Donna, and it is a multi-part question. It says, you've written Signature in the Cell against chemical evolution, Darwin's Doubt against biological evolution, and now Return of the God Hypothesis, which includes the origin of the universe, including using Bayesian probabilities. Which of these topics do you personally find the most intriguing?
Well, I think the one that seized me first was this question of the origin of the first life. I was fortunate to attend a conference early in my career where this was being discussed from both a theistic and a materialist evolutionary point of view. And the people on the panel at the time included Charles Thaxton and Dean Kenyon, who were probably, and Walter Bradley, who were probably the first scientists to were developing and championing the idea of intelligent design in our contemporary context. And I was fortunate to be living in Dallas at the time where Charles Thaxton was also working. So he took me under his wing and really mentored me. And at that point, I had very little biology in my background, but I was very interested in this idea that explaining the origin of life required explaining the origin of the information that was needed to build a cell. And I was working in the oil industry doing doing what was called seismic digital signal processing, which was an early form of information technology. And so the idea that information was crucial to life was pretty exciting, and that was the big outstanding question that no one had been able to answer concerning the origin of life is what first intrigued me. But I kind of find it's the whole arc of natural history from the beginning of the universe to right up to the origin of human beings that I find fascinating. There's a really great book to be written by someone in our movement on the whole question of the origin of human beings, and we've all been exposed and immersed in the kind of hominid sequence that we learn in school, or we've all seen that famous diagram of the hunched over Australopithecine gradually becoming a Homo habilis, becoming a Homo erectus. And that turns out to be a lot more artwork than science. And I think the person to write on that is our up and coming Casey Luskin, who's done a lot of work on that and has an excellent essay in our book Critiquing Theistic Evolution on the origin of human beings. But the origin of life was the topic that first fascinated me. But the cosmology is really interesting, and because I was interested in fossils from a very early age, it was fun for me in later life to come back and write a book about the origin of the Cambrian animals that are so beautifully preserved in the fossils all around the world. So the origin of life was my first love, but the other two subjects are equally fascinating.
Well, my experience with paleontology is dusting off little trilobites.
Yeah, right.
In Utah, someplace in the middle of nowhere on some vacation. All right, part B from Donna is, how do you organize your learning and study time, and do you have any particular study routine?
I have, alas, so many different hats that I have to wear in this role as the director of the Center for Science and Culture that I don't have a regular routine. I tend to burrow when I get seized with something, and sort of obsess on it for a while, and then resurface. And I have we have all these talented scientists and staff people doing great things for discovery, and so I spend a lot of time with fundraising, and I spend a lot of time doing the media spokesman, public debate person role, and a certain amount of teaching. And right now, as a result of the Joe Rogan interview last summer, there's a young scientist in New Zealand. Well, he's from New Zealand. He is in England right now, and he did a whole video presenting a 90-minute critique of a 2-minute answer I gave on Rogan. But it turns out to be about a really important topic, which is the origin of the proteins that make everything work inside life. And we've argued that that proteins are that the origin of new protein structures called protein folds are beyond the reach of the mutation natural selection mechanism, that they're extremely rare. The functional proteins are extremely rare among all the possible combinations of the amino acids that make up the proteins. So if you think of a Scrabble bag of letters and you pull out 12 of them, there's the ratio of words to sequences of 12 letters in length is about 1/100 trillion. and which means that finding a 12-letter word at random is going to be extremely difficult. You're going to need a lot of trials, a lot of opportunities to make that a random search plausible. And it's probably in, I guess, chapter 10 of Return of the God Hypothesis, I sort of explained this problem. It's sometimes called the problem of combinatorial inflation, or the problem of the rarity of genes and proteins in sequence space, where the sequence space refers to all the possible ways of arranging those amino acids that there are, compared to the very few that will generate a functional protein structure. And this young scientist said, well, it's true that the proteins are very rare, but that doesn't mean they're isolated one from another. They might be closely adjacent, so that tiny little mutational changes would allow you to skip from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And so the Darwinian process could still work. So it's an interesting counter argument to the work that Douglas Axe did establishing the rarity. And on the Rogan interview, I explained that other scientists, protein scientists, have found that the proteins are not only rare, but they're isolated. That if you, just like as in the computer world, if you change a few digits of functioning code, you're going to very quickly lose function altogether. You won't gradually convert a section of code for making one computer game into another. You'll drop into a functionless abyss. And I explained that this is exactly what an Israeli protein scientist named Dan Tofik has found. So so in order to defend this really crucial argument for against Darwinism and for intelligent design, we've kind of had to do a deep dive on this whole question of the origin of protein. With the crucial structures are called folds. What happens is, if you start to accumulate mutations, the stable three-dimensional structure of the fold will unwind, lose stability, and also function. And this has just been a recurring empirical result. So we've had to gather, my colleague Brian Miller and I have been working on this and gathering all the different data from the different experiments, and we're writing up a really thorough rebuttal. So, the young scientist that critiqued me did a kind of a friendly level 90-minute presentation on this on his podcast, but his critique got a lot of play and circulation, so it's required a response. And to do it's easy to raise a facile objection to something. It's harder to provide a really comprehensive and rigorous counter argument. But that's been, so among all the different things I've been doing recently, that's been the main scientific thing I've been working on. And it's pretty exciting. I think we've broken some new ground, and we're getting close to releasing that. So I actually look forward to possibly having a public dialogue debate with the scientist about that. So anyway, so that's more typical. That when I got going on the books, I would do the research at the same time as writing them. I'd have written, in each case, I didn't do I didn't do Signature in the Cell until I had a fairly long review essay on the origin of life, making the same argument in about 15,000 words. And then what I did is I took sections of that essay and broke them out, and they became chapters, and each chapter required deeper research. So I would burrow, write, and then pull it all together. And I kind of followed the same pattern with the other books. It's probably no way to do it, but it's kind of what worked for me. The first two books took, I think they were 21 months each, and Return to the God Hypothesis was 3 years and 3 months. So, but I've been thinking about it for since the 85 conference, where I encountered the scientists debating the origin of the universe and the origin of life from the theistic and materialist perspectives. When I get done with them, the last thing I want to do is write something else anytime soon.
Right.
It becomes really fun to talk about them for a couple of years. So,
Understandable.
Right, the next question kind of goes back to your faith journey. When you began reading the Bible in high school, did you do this entirely on your own, or did you have someone guiding you and giving you support?
it was pretty much on my own at first. I think, if you may have I can't remember how much I talked about it in the God hypothesis, but maybe a little bit about the kind of uh, angst I was having about life having any meaning. It was a little bit anyway. When I found a big fat white Catholic family Bible, and when I opened it up, it fell open to the divisions between the two testaments, and there was this fantastic portrait of Jesus um, with saying, "Come unto me, all ye who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And I thought that sounded really good, and that's where I started reading. And it was kind of sometime in my sophomore year, and about a chapter a night, and it just started to settle all the internal anxiety. I couldn't go to bed at night without reading at least one chapter. But then I remember sometime in the middle of my junior year saying, telling myself, I have to stop thinking about Christianity. And I vowed I would stop thinking about it for 2 weeks. And but somewhere along this time, I had a job. Yeah, it was about my junior and senior year. I had a job just driving, picking stuff up from my dad's company. And so I would find these gospel radio broadcasts from the South, and they were pretty much all the Christians that I had heard of were from Oklahoma or Dallas or someplace with heavy Southern accents. So I didn't know there were any Christians in Seattle. And then in my senior year, a Young Life Club came to our town, and there was there was a couple of really prominent Christians at our high school who were at a place called Sambika, a Sammamish Bible camp, and they were people I admired because of the way they conducted themselves in the high school. One was a basketball star, but he didn't seem to have any concern about being popular, and he was kind to kids that weren't. And I thought that was an interesting uh, kind of. So I was drawn into that Young Life group sort of halfway through my senior year, and that's when I started meeting other believers. Though I was still pretty uncertain about. I had said the prayer a whole pile of times, but I was expecting something to happen that hadn't. I don't know. I didn't. So I wasn't sure I was a Christian, but I guess I was talking about it all the time. I found that when I went back from my 10-year high school reunion, people came up to me to tell me that they had become Christians and that they had remembered that I was, and I said, I what? And I realized I was talking about it all the time, but uncertain about my own, standing, I guess.
Wow.
Unlikely evangelist.
Yeah, well, it's my obsessive tendency. I just it was the most interesting thing I knew, and it seemed so important, but I wasn't sure that I was in the right place, partly because I didn't know many Christians, and I didn't have that guidance to say, no, you've done everything you need to do. Now just let the Holy Spirit work, that kind of thing. Which is what I'd probably tell someone today in my similar situation. But
Right, you were waiting for lightning.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, so this question's from Kristen, but it's something that I was wondering as well. She says, I've noticed how in your interviews and debates, how gracious you are to others. How hard was it for you to develop the maturity to respond to critics like Stephen Fletcher, or deal with incessant interruptions like on the MSNBC Dan Abrams show with Eugenie Scott?
Oh, that was yeah, I remember that one. Well, I think somebody asked me about this the other day, and I don't think it's any evidence of godliness on my part. It's more that with the philosophical training, you learn that if someone is um, attacking you personally, that they're really wasting their time in a debate, and that the audience typically can see through that. So when people do that, I tend to smile inside and think, oh well, too bad, so sad. You're wasting your time. You could have been making a more formidable argument. Um, I also had I was kind of a very much a late bloomer growing up, and a little bit of a wimp. I got beat up a lot, and then I got to college and started to develop. And one of my dorm mates was a skilled boxer, and so I started to learn boxing from him. And then after I graduated, I had a Russian coach for several years, and then continued on and did a little boxing at Cambridge as well. And one of the things about boxing is that you get hit, and you can't succeed if you lose your temper. So that I think was, because I was overly sensitive and emotional as a teenager. And so that was just very good training for me for rest of life. And also the Russian coach I had taught, he taught different styles to different temperaments. And he said he thought that I was a sort of anxious, nervous type, and he taught me to counterpunch and to score backing up. So using the other person's aggression against him, and there's some way that all carries over, and the debate is very much like combat. It's just verbally, and so. Maybe there's something in that background. I think it definitely helped me mature and gain control over my emotions. And I think nothing goes to waste in the kingdom of God. And even something as disreputable as boxing has been useful for me and in preparing me for what I'm doing now. So
That's really interesting, actually. I love the way, God prepares us things that we would not have expected that would be helpful. All right, we're going to jump to some science questions. This is my question. You talked about how origin of life experiments have the problem of investigator interference.
right, yeah.
But given that researchers don't have the luxury of observing results over billions of years, some interference seems necessary. Is there any potential experiment related to chemical evolution that could support their case? Hypothetically, what results would they have to show that could theoretically challenge, like legitimately, the God hypothesis?
Wow, that's a really astute technical question. In The Mystery of Life's Origin, the book that was written in the mid-'80s, critiquing the chemical evolutionary theories, the authors actually proposed criteria for determining when too much was when investigator interference was too much, and when it showed something that was obviously demonstrating what intelligence could do as opposed to what undirected chemical processes could do. I don't know that anyone has established a universally accepted threshold for that, but it's what Jim Tour has shown, and if you've seen any of his videos, is that the extent to which the chemistry involved in these prebiotic simulation experiments moves in a life-friendly direction. That is to say, not producing a cell. No one has done that yet, despite many people promising or projecting that they would. But what they have shown is, but to the extent that it moves in that direction by generating life-relevant biochemical subunits, invariably there's an elaborate there's an elaborate recipe being followed where there's multiple steps involved, where at each step of the way the intelligent chemist is having to eliminate unwanted byproducts or heat things up to specific temperatures and then cool things down very quickly at just the right time, and introducing other reagents that they purchased that are purified and have purchased from a chemical manufacturing plant or what. And it's in no way are any of these steps demonstrating what would happen in a prebiotic environment. And I guess the contrast to that is to see what does happen in a warm little pond or in an ocean or in a hydrothermal vent. And the problem is nothing relevant at all happens in these proposed environments. So whereas I don't think there is an agreed kind of standard as to when too much, when investigator interference has become too much, it's pretty much obvious in every case that it is too much. And this is and what underlies this is what Jim Tour likes to say: chemistry does not care about life. The chemicals don't care about life. They don't arrange themselves. They don't interact with each other in a way that moves towards life. They move towards inorganic kinds of outcomes. And so it's it would be nice if the origin of life community themselves came up with a good standard for too much investigator interference. But right now, it's just so obvious that every allegedly positive outcome is the consequence mainly of intelligent design and not of what chemistry would do on its own. And that's the problem for them.
You know, this, I don't want to take too much time, but just quickly, I was pre-med like 40 years ago out of high school,
That's great.
like many moons ago, and I worked for a summer as an intern in an exobiology lab at the University of Hawaii at Manoa under Claire Folsom, a guy who had a
Oh,
research grant from NASA with
no kidding.
closed ecosystems, trying to like zap them and create stuff, basically.
Yeah, right.
This very thing. And like nothing, of course it was one summer, but nothing happened, you know.
Yes, right.
But I recall thinking, because I wasn't a Christian at the time, thinking, wow, this will be amazing if we could do this. This will show, you know. But alas.
One of my classmates in my first year at Cambridge in the master's degree, the MPhil degree, had worked with Claire Folsom and had come from Hawaii. You know, so that's yeah, I remember that name.
Wow, that's many.
All right, the next question comes from Katrina, who unfortunately doesn't have a functional camera, so we can't see her face.
Okay.
But she's with us. She asked, if you had to distill the book Return of the God Hypothesis down into one or two main points in as simple of terms as possible, what would those big picture pieces be?
Oh, that's a great question too. When I'm on talk radio, I have to do that a lot, or talk whatever it is now, podcast. And what I typically do is quote Richard Dawkins, who says that the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if at bottom there's no purpose, no design, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And then I compliment him for framing the issue so clearly, but explain that I think that the universe actually has many properties that we would not expect on the basis of his materialistic, blind, pitiless indifference philosophy. And those three big discoveries are that the universe had a beginning, which was completely unexpected by the materialists and has not been explained by them to this day. That the universe has been fine-tuned from the beginning to make possible the existence of life. And that fine-tuning is exquisite and extremely improbable and not something, again, that materialists would have expected or can explain. And then thirdly, that life contains digital information and a whole complex information processing system that is so intricate and so reminiscent of our own high-tech digital world in the computing environment that Richard Dawkins himself has said recently, in fact, that he's been knocked sideways with wonder and disbelief at the complexity of the digital processing system inside the cell. So that you have these three big discoveries about the origin of the universe, its fine-tuning, and the origin of life that each seemed completely unexpected from a materialistic point of view, that undirected material processes do not produce digital code. They do not produce finely tuned systems. And if the material universe itself had a beginning, there's no possibility of explaining the origin of the material universe by reference to a prior materialistic entity. If matter and energy themselves come into existence a finite time ago, before then, there was no matter to do the causing. So materialism, again, fails as an explanation. We need something else. So that's a sort of quick summary of the argument that I try to give and when I'm short on time. Still pretty long, I guess. But
Katrina, did you get all that? Because I wanna write that down. She says, thank you so much. I just need to memorize that.
Well, I used to tell my students, it's nice, if you're wanting to share your faith, to have a few things in your hip pocket that you can share quickly. So for me, if I hear the bumper music on a talk radio interview, and I know that means it's time to not talk too long and get off the stage, I'll remind people that Bill Gates says that DNA is like a software program, but much more complex than any we've ever created. And yet we have found if DNA is like a software program, that implies there must be a master programmer for life, because we know that it takes a programmer to make software. And I found that quick little distillation of the DNA argument is often extremely thought-provoking for people. And we'll can share it in the barber chair or on an airplane, or another thing I like to share just as a Christian is that the five major figures in the trial of Jesus have all been independently attested by recent archaeological findings. Caiaphas and Pilate and Herod Antipas and Peter and Jesus himself. And I've recently learned that a bone box of the father of Simon Cyrene has been found, and also the high priest Annas. So it's actually up to 7 figures now. So that one crucial part of the Gospels, recording the trial and death by crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, has been extensively corroborated by archaeological inscriptions, which are really hard to find. So things like, sometimes it's nice to have some things like that quickly available to share with people to just get a conversation started.
I like it. All right, so this question is from Janet. Do you believe God intervened and input information to create again at times like the Cambrian explosion? You told my husband once, many years ago apparently, that you believe in older but young man. Do you have any resources that you recommend on the subject?
I do believe in an interventionist God, and I do think that the fossil record is dramatic evidence of God's discrete activity. The term interventionism is often used by people who hold to theistic evolution as a kind of pejorative, like it's a bad thing to think of God intervening. And what they'll say is, well, we believe in a God who's always there and always active, so talking about him intervening is sort of a deistic conception of God. And I don't think that's correct. I think God sustains the universe by the word of his power, as Hebrews says. And that is part of his ongoing governance over the natural world. But he also acts discreetly as an agent within the universe that he otherwise sustains and upholds. And the medieval theologians had 2 Latin terms to capture these 2 powers of God, and they thought of them as 2 powers of God. They described his potentia ordinata, his ordinary power, which is responsible for the regularities we see in nature, but also his fiat power, or his potentia absoluta, where he acts discretely in time in a way that we can perceive as we would perceive the actions of any other agent. And so I think God acts in both ways. And what we see in the fossil record is a series of abrupt appearances of major new biological form, and therefore we know also discrete inputs of information into the biosphere. Because just like in our computer world, you can't generate a new program or operating system without new code. In the biological world, you can't build a new biological form without genetic and other forms of biological information. It takes information to generate new form. And so I think what we see, Gunter Beckley, the German paleontologist, and I wrote an essay after I published Darwin's Doubt in a book critiquing theistic evolution. And we identified 19 separate major fossil explosions that implied abrupt appearances of new form and information. And I think since information is an indicator of the activity of intelligence, I think what we're seeing is evidence of the activity of the hand of God at those points in geological and biological history. So yeah, I'm a supernaturalist. I believe that God, just as we are agents who can affect discrete changes in the physical world without disrupting the laws of nature. If I drop a ball, the law of gravity will be at work pulling it to the ground. But if I throw a ball up in the air, even though unsuspended bodies fall, my throwing it in the air isn't violating the law of gravity. I've applied a countervening force against the law of gravity that allows the ball to fly for a time. And so there's no violation in an agent causing something unexpected to happen. And that's what a miracle is. So I don't believe that miracles are violations of the laws of nature, but I do believe they're instances of divine action. And they're entirely possible, since miracles are acts of God, discrete acts of God, they're entirely possible if there is a God to act. And since we have, I think, very strong evidence for the existence of God, I think miracles are entirely possible. And therefore, it's really a question of the historical evidence as to whether or not they've happened. And given the really impressive reliability of the Bible in its historical witness, it's I think a perfectly rational thing to believe that the biblical miracles, as recorded in the scriptures, did in fact occur. So I don't know, I answered more of your question than you asked, but it's a pet subject of mine. I think people misunderstand what the laws of nature are. They think they stop things from happening, but they don't stop us as agents from doing surprising and unexpected things, and nor do would they stop God himself from doing such things. Then, as far as resources on the old Earth, new Earth question, there's a nice book called Creation, Evolution, and Intelligent Design by Zondervan that has, they lay out 4 views: the old Earth view of Hugh Ross, the young Earth view of Ken Ham, the theistic evolutionist view of Deborah Harzma, and then they have me representing intelligent design. But in the process, I probably the only place in print explain why I affirm an old Earth and old universe, but and that I don't think the Bible teaches a young Earth. And I explain why. We could discuss that if you like, but also why I am sympathetic to the idea that human beings are of relatively recent vintage. Just briefly, I think the archaeological record has to be taken into account when we assess human origins. And we have these bones in the savannas of Africa, but those bone piles are a mess. And that as I said, the hominid sequence that we learn via artwork is really not anything as clear as what is presented. We have Australopithecines, which are basically ape-like, chimp-like creatures. And then we have Homo erectus. Homo habilis, which was the alleged missing link for years, is now, even by paleoanthropologists, being described as an artifact of classification. That is to say, it's a hypothetical reconstruction rather than an actual skeleton that's been found. And so you've got this big gap between Australo and Homo, but then there's this other gap, which is really striking, which is sometimes they call it the Big Bang of human cultural evolution. And sometime within the last 40,000 years, and possibly closer to the present than that, you get the first painting, the first representational art, the first agriculture is since the last ice age. The first cities are in the last maybe 6,000 to 8,000 years at most. And then the first writing, the same. And so if anatomically modern humans with our or immediate ancestors to anatomically modern humans with our cognitive capabilities had been around since even Homo erectus, where's the evidence of the distinctive cognitive capabilities that we have? It's just not there past a few tens of thousands of years. Now, I don't think the genealogies in the Old Testament are exhaustive. They're representational. So my dad always says that, used to say to my mom, he'd go online and Google, and he'd say, "Well, I'm afraid that we've labored in obscurity, my dear." And he said that this was his ironic way, because I'm getting all this attention because of the work on intelligent design. But my mom's dad was a fairly well-known trumpet player who played in the Glenn Miller Orchestra. And so you can find a lot about him online. And so if it was a biblical genealogy, I would be the grandson of, or I'd be the son of Les Beagle, and my poor father would be skipped because he was a hardworking engineer who never got any attention. So I don't think you can make a Bishop Ussher-like calculation as to how old Adam was. But by the same token, I don't think you can push the genealogies back indefinitely. So I don't know exactly, when I don't know exactly how I would date Adam and Eve. But I do think there's strong evidence for a single couple as the origin of anatomically modern humans. And I think that the origin of that couple in our race is sometime in the last tens of thousands of years. And I would incline towards inside 40,000 years, not 2 million, not something like that. So my view is ancient Earth, ancient universe, recent humans, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was quite recent indeed. So
That's very interesting because we all notice that you don't even address the fact that the world is billions of years old. You just sort of throw it out there like this is obvious based on the science.
well, here's my my view. When I read Genesis, I'm struck with a couple of things. One is that the sequence of events is in Genesis 1 is remarkably accurate to what we now understand scientifically as far as just the natural history. And secondly, when you get to day 4, the text tells us that that God either created or caused to appear. It's a Hebrew verb, haya, and it can mean either of either of those are allowable meanings. But either way, in day 4, we get either God either caused to appear or created the sun and the moon and made them and gave them as markers of the days, the years, and the seasons. So they're the time markers. And of course, that's right. We mark time as the sun moves across the arc of the ecliptic, and the moon gives us months. And so if the method of keeping time from a human point of view is not possible until the 4th yom or day of creation, then we have to be very careful not to impute our notions of time to the days of creation that are already established. We've already had 3 days of creation before it's possible to mark a solar denominated day, which is the means by which we create time. So there's a very conservative Bible scholar at the Covenant Seminary, Jack Collins, who's also often asked, well, are the days of creation short Ken Ham days, or are they long Hugh Ross days? And if you know the players in the internecine debate within the evangelical world. And he says neither. They're days of indeterminate length from a human point of view. It's clear we are not given time markers until well after the days are established. So they're God's days of indeterminate length. And so for me, that means that it's not only perfectly legitimate, but probably necessary to look to the evidence of the scientific evidence to determine questions of the age of the Earth and the universe. And doing that, I come to the view that based on radiometric dating and lots of other things, that the Earth is old and the universe is older, but also by the same token, I don't think you have good evidence that human beings have been around very long. And so so I put the shoe on the other foot with my evolutionary anthropology. People do the evolutionary anthropologists who want to date the human origins to 2 million or years, and that we have this smooth transition from Australopithecines. There's no evidence of that. I think we are the consequence of another one of those abrupt appearance events, also used to be called a creation event.
That Zondervan book you mentioned sounds interesting. I might have to check into that. All right, the next question is from Kristen, and she is asking, given the tendency to move away from middle ground in our culture today, do you find that current scientists and philosophers dig in their heels on their ideas more than those in the past? Or do they still have the ability for healthy debates? And she also asks if you enjoy debates.
I'll answer that one first. I hate getting ready for them, but they typically go well. And so afterwards, I'm on kind of a high. It's like I have a 4-year-old grandson that loves his swimming lessons. And when he comes back from being in the water, he's all hyped up. And that's kind of how I am after debates. I hate getting ready because it's adversarial. It's kind of like combat. It's a lot like getting ready for the sparring sessions that in boxing in the old days for me. And so I don't like it. But we have good, strong arguments, and if you keep your cool, usually it goes pretty well. I've also found when you were asking before about the, not getting fussed up about things when people are insulting, I found that just that it is an advantage to us if you can keep the conversations friendly. People expect that it's going to get nasty. And if you can keep them friendly, you can often win concessions from people on the other side. If you are complimentary and respectful and you take time to listen to their point of view and you don't interrupt them, and then you say, that's a good point. But by the same token, have you considered this? Because this is something that has moved me in my thinking. Or, take more of an irenic approach so it doesn't feel like a debate, feels like a conversation. And when that happens, then afterwards people say, oh, he won. Well, it wasn't, but it didn't feel like a debate when it was happening. And so anyway, what was the first part of the question? Oh,
given the tendency to move away from
right.
culture, do they dig in their heels more now than they did in the past?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because obviously that is something that's happening in the culture. Things are getting so polarized. But we have found since about 2016 a lot of prominent scientists coming our way and people changing their minds about big issues once they are encountering good arguments. And so we've had, David Galarenter, the head of the computer science department at Yale, read Darwin's Doubt, but also David Verlinsky's Deniable Darwin, and he encountered this mathematical argument against the plausibility of the mutation selection mechanism that we were talking about earlier. And as a computer scientist, he saw, oh, of course, this couldn't work. If you start randomly changing a section of code, you're going to degrade the code long before you get to a new program. And so he wrote an essay called Darwin: A Fond Farewell. And it was a long review essay and made a public sort of retraction of his longtime support for Darwinian evolution. Gunter Beckley, the paleontologist that I mentioned, had this very public conversion to first from Darwinism to intelligent design and then to Christianity. And so we've had a number of people, very prominent people, changing their view in response to encountering very well considered and developed arguments for intelligent design. So it's made us kind of bullish that we've seen these changes and young people coming our way with a lot of enthusiasm. So I would say generally in the culture, people have become more locked in and more polarized, but we've been finding that through the patient work of a core group of people over a long period of time, that we're actually winning some hearts and minds that we never expected to, and that's pretty encouraging.
Well, you just answered the next question, basically, because my question was that Justin Brierley recently wrote a book entitled The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. And you said in the book that the God hypothesis is now more respectable than any other time in the last 100 years. I believe you're quoting somebody, but I was wondering if you've seen any movement, and you just answered that question.
Well, right. And it's not just about the science issues. You have figures like Jordan Peterson, who's been clearly moving towards Christian faith. Tom Holland. In 2018, I wrote an op-ed for the Jerusalem Post upon the passing of Steven Weinberg, the great, alas, atheist, Nobel Prize-winning theoretical physicist from the University of Texas. And I posited in that editorial that we were actually, with Weinberg's passing and Hawking's passing a year or two before, that we were witnessing the eclipse of the new atheism. And we still had Lawrence Krauss and Richard Dawkins around, but Krauss had run into Me Too problems and was now a pariah at his university, and Dawkins had massively overstated his case and become a kind of figure of ridicule in the UK. And other serious figures like Weinberg and Hawking had passed away. So that, that juggernaut that seemed so invincible in 2007, 2008 with the massive sales of those new atheist books like uh, Dawkins's God Delusion, this seemed to be a spent force. And then when I suggested the much more interesting phenomena was what I called the new atheists, people like Tom Holland and Douglas Murray and Charles Murray and Jordan Peterson and others who were saying, gee, I really lament the loss of a Christian foundation for culture. I can't get myself over the line to believe, but the world was a better place when people believed in an objective moral order, when they believed the Christian message of forgiveness and of redemption and God with us and all of that. And so, but now what's interesting is one by one, many of those figures that I mentioned have Charles Murray, I think, has become a Christian, and Tom Holland. I was in a discussion with him. It was, I think, set up a little bit as a debate of some kind, but it didn't turn out to be anything like that. It was Tom Holland and Douglas Murray and me discussing the God question with Peter Robinson, who has that wonderful program Uncommon Knowledge. And Peter was trying to pin down Tom Holland during the debate about where he actually stood. And we got off the set afterwards, and he had presented himself, or had been presenting himself, as a Christian atheist, meaning I affirm the value of Christianity for culture, but I can't believe it.
Right.
And after the debate, he said, "Oh yeah, about that Christian atheism stuff." He said, "You should know." He said, "I'm no longer an atheist. I've been going to St. Bartholomew's, a high church Anglican congregation in East London." And he said, "I've been looking at the evidence." He said, "On most days, I believe the resurrection happened." So I mean, that's the kind of movement you see. The last videos I've seen of Jordan Peterson, he's been talking about the crucifixion and the story of the crucifixion and the resurrection. And his wife is apparently a born again Christian, and he's still cagey when he's asked directly about it, but it's all he's talking about. So he's like me in high school. So, and then there's that the woman who's at Stanford at the Hoover Institution, last name Ali,
Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Hayyan Hirsi Ali, and her husband is one of those Christian atheists, Niall Ferguson, but now she's become a Christian, and she was one of the most prominent spokesmen for the new atheism, having come out into that from nominal Islam. So, that's an interesting trajectory. And somebody told me recently they'd been watching a lot of Rogan interviews, and since I was on last summer, he's had on Matthew McConaughey and the kid who wrote the Rich Men North of Richmond song, and he quoted the Proverbs to him, and Rogan said, "Yeah, that's profound," and so there's figures that were, I mean, 2 years ago, Rogan was doing these anti-Christian rants. So I think there's something happening in the culture, that you have some figures that are commanding attention, that are deliberating publicly about all this. So
even Dawkins recently said he's
appreciating
Christianity as a culture as opposed to Islam.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, but in the God Delusion, he was saying the God of the Bible is the most misogynist, homophobic, blah blah. I mean, he was just cursing God. So yeah, even that is and I've been in touch with Justin. I think he has a very good thesis, and he tells a number of the behind the scenes stories of how the new atheism unraveled. And part of it was something that you might have expected as a Christian moral philosopher, because there's no objective basis for morality in an atheistic worldview, in a materialistic worldview. People then inevitably adopt different moral positions, and radically different moral positions. There's no underlying coherent moral philosophy that flows out of atheism. So you have, rabidly anti-feminist atheists, and you have rabidly extreme feminist atheists, and you have people that are, they're the super woke and the super anti-woke, and they've been at each other's throats, So it's unraveling because there's no coherency to that worldview, and so Um, that's a, yeah, I'm very optimistic about what's happened. I think we may be on the cusp of not a revival, because I think we're in a largely post-Christian period in the West, where many people lack a basic understanding of faith. So when Billy Graham preached at Wembley Stadium in 1954, he could call people back to faith. He could call them to repentance, and they had a background of understanding. They knew, people said, well, yeah, basically people had a Christian worldview, but may not have been living consistent with the framework that they had been raised with. But I think now what we may be on the cusp of is an awakening, where people begin to understand something that they never understood before, because it is, and this is where I would commend all of you, I think it is a kind of a heyday for Christian apologetics. Gary Habermas, one of the great defenders of the resurrection, has said that more great Christian scholarship with apologetic implications has been done in the last 25 years than in the entire 2,000-year history of the church. And the only thing holding us back is that not enough people know about it. They don't know the arguments. They don't know the evidence. So I think what you're doing is just tremendously consequential. And we've seen, the effect of just very few people beginning to make those kind of arguments in the public space, and it has starting to have a trickle down, ramifying out effect. So,
well, thank you. We'll keep doing it.
Yeah, definitely.
John Lennox says, we're losing our kids because we're not answering their questions, but we have good answers to offer. So let's get it out there. That's the sort of.
All right, Janet says she has a prodigal son who has a very new age belief about God, but is gifted in physics and math and is intrigued by your book, which she just gave him at Easter. Do you have a forum or know of one where Christians who are scientists will answer questions on these topics? He would love to be able to discuss and ask questions about it.
If you send me his name and email address, I'll put him in touch with one of our rising young apologists, who's also a biologist. His name is Jonathan McClatchy. You may have, I don't know, Anna, if you've run into him, but he's a whiz kid. And he has a ministry that he operates separately from Discovery called Talk About Doubts. And he'll set up times to do either individual conversations or group conversations about key issues related to the intellectual credibility of the faith. And he might be a good person for that young prodigal to get in touch with. Also, I don't know if you know, but Jim Tour, who is not so much an apologist, but an evangelist, he's done these debates about origin of life, but he will give an hour of his time to talk online to anyone who would like to hear about the evidence for the resurrection. And we support his research on nanomachines. And when he sends us his lab reports, he also attaches an addendum with the list of people that he's brought to Christ and has been mentoring and discipling in the period since we last made him the grant. Now, the grants are never for that, but he includes that anyway. And that's just Jim. He's so passionate about his faith. He's very typical of many Messianic Jews who, pay the whole price up front and then are just completely sold out. And so we have a little deal, because I'm not a very effective evangelist. I'm not very good at closing the deal, but he is. And so he sends me people that want to have worldview conversations or apologetic conversations. And then I send him people that are to the point where they want to discuss more personally what they need to do about it. So we kind of have a little behind the scenes agreement, the two of us. But
So sound like promising resources. That sounds great.
One thing I would mention too is that, as you all would know from your and by the way, I'm very flattered that you would take the time to read the whole book as part of your study group. But you know that I, in the book, compare the explanatory power of a pantheistic New Age worldview, a theistic worldview, a materialistic worldview and a deistic worldview. These are sort of the four great systems of thought. So I do engage that that way of thinking in Return of the God hypothesis, and Janet's son may find that engages the kinds of thinking that he's been attracted to, and we'll give him a chance to evaluate it.
Fantastic. My father-in-law is a Messianic Jew, and he's constantly sending people to watch James Tour's testimony on One for Israel.
Yeah, yeah.
Because he's just very compelling. Well, we want to be respectful of your time, so we're going to close out by asking if you have a book or a project coming out that we should be keeping our eye on.
Well, the main thing right now is that we're working on this long review essay about the question of the origin of protein folds. And since what the genetic information in DNA builds are protein structures called folds that are capable of performing biological functions, this is really a key extension of the arguments that I've made in the other books, in particular in Signature in the Cell and Darwin's Doubt, arguing that the mutation selection mechanism lacks the creative power to generate the information you need to build those crucial structures, proteins, that do all the jobs in the cell. And so we've had a spirited counter argument and objection posed, and so we're taking the argument one step further by answering that and compiling and organizing all the interesting research that's done that we think really supports our view and deepens the case that we've made around that. So that's been the main writing project. I have a friendship with a young archaeologist named Titus Kennedy, and he's actually our staff archaeologist at Discovery. He now has 3 books out on his own, including one recently called Excavating the Evidence for Jesus. But we've talked about doing a book together that brings the sort of philosophical argumentation that I would bring to the table with his knowledge of archaeology, and making a really comprehensive case for the reliability of the Bible from Genesis to through the New Testament. And I taught a course that was filmed with the Focus on the Family people called True You. And the second of that set was on the historical reliability of the Bible. Titus was my research assistant in preparing for that 10-lecture set. And he was at the time a master's degree student in ancient Near Eastern studies. He's since completed his PhD. He's written 3 books. I used to view him as someone I was mentoring. Now he's mentoring me. But we have talked about doing a book that brings my skill in philosophical argumentation together with his knowledge of the archaeology, and making a really comprehensive case addressing all the counter arguments against the reliability of the Bible. And so that's something that I think I need to do before I leave the planet. But we haven't embarked on that project yet, but it's something I have in mind. So
now that response on protein folds, is
right.
that going to be in paper form, book form, podcast?
We will post, because it was the critique was delivered electronically. We'll post it on our Evolution News and Views, probably as a series. But now that we've done the research, we're probably running 10 to 12,000 words. It's going to be a comprehensive review essay that we'll probably want to publish in a scientific journal as well. And it's Doug Axe's work was so seminal, foundational to our whole case, that we felt that it really has needed this kind of comprehensive defense, and we're finding the evidence is amply present to make that defense. So it's pretty exciting, actually. If any of you saw our Dallas Science and Faith Conference this year, I gave a talk on what we've been working on this, and it was maybe a bit more technical than I should have attempted for a popular conference, but it was what I was very passionate about at the time. So that is for me, the current writing project.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve Meyer. We appreciate you coming on to talk.
Thank you all. And I wanted to greet Jeff Johnson's sister in Alaska. And yeah, it's Katerina, right? Yeah.
Kristen. It's Kristen right here.
Okay,
Yeah.
Kristen. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
that's great. That's great.
That's crazy. I didn't even know that you knew him the whole time I was reading your book.
Yeah. Well, I wondered if you were she, because you and Jeff look alike with the blonde hair and the high cheekbones and all of that. So it's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, yeah. He called me one Saturday morning and said that you were going to be on the Zoom. So
Yeah, I was so excited that we could have you and that you took the time for all of us. Just super.
well, it sounds like you guys have a great fellowship that's spread out over big distance. So
Dude,
Yeah, I
Claude's
get to
here.
see him real soon too. Huh?
Claude's here. She's in the Philippines. So we've got Kristen in Alaska. We're all over the country and the world. So
that is fantastic. Well, thank you. I'm very honored to be to join your group and that you would take such an interest in our work. So thank you very much.
thank you very much.
Well, take care, ladies. I really appreciate your time tonight. Thanks. And the great questions. Very good. Okay, bye-bye.
All right. Well, first I want to introduce our new audiovisual expert, Beth O'Neill from Tennessee. We did announce that she had volunteered to use her gifts to benefit our ministry here. And so since she's with us tonight, I wanted to take the opportunity to let you all say hi to her and welcome her personally as it can be via Zoom. But welcome, Beth. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. And I would like to say that I also know Kristen from Alaska. So she is
Really?
the person that, yes, we've taken theology mom classes together.
Oh, that's so fun.
So Kristen's the person to know in this book club, apparently.
I guess so.
Yeah. The person who lives in a zip code with 12 people, and I'm the person. Right.
All right. To finish up tonight, I'm going to be announcing our next book, which is Faithfully Different by Natasha Crane. Bit of a different genre.
Right. A little less intellectually taxing.
But still intellectual.
It's challenging material. It's just not science. Anything will be easier in my book.
Yes, and fewer pages.
And fewer.
All right. Thank you so much, ladies, for being here.
When are you guys thinking of starting that? Do you have a date or just
May 14th.
Oh, okay.
It'll all be posted. Anne's going to post. Well, it's already up on our website. And Anne will post it either this evening or tomorrow on all of our social media platforms. So, and we already have a Q&A confirmed with Natasha for July 9th. Yeah.
Which apparently is hard to get, but Patty works with Grassroots Apologetics for Parents, and so she's one of Natasha's main ladies. Otherwise, I think we would have been out of luck.
Well, I don't know if I'm a main lady, but she did kind of do it as a favor. Anyway, thank you all so much. It's been great. Hope to see you for our next book discussion.